Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, each day in this parliament we acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. While acknowledgement and celebration are right and proper, they aren't sufficient. As custodians of the lands and waters for many thousands of years, our First Nations peoples have unique insight as we watch our climate change right across our country. Human-induced climate change affects people everywhere, but there is no inequality that climate change doesn't make worse, including Indigenous inequality. More positively, acting on climate change can and should provide opportunities for First Nations peoples to share in the ownership and dividends from new renewable energy, from carbon abatement programs and from work we do to increase climate resilience across Australia. As with everything, there's more to do, but I and the government are determined to ensure that whatever work happens to reduce emissions and build Australia into a renewable energy superpower happens in partnership with First Nations peoples. We've already launched the First Nations Clean Energy Climate Change Advisory Committee, and I'm looking forward to announcing our First Nations Clean Energy Strategy soon. Mr Speaker, this week we've had a reminder of why decarbonising matters. Not just the unseasonably hot weather, but the increasing unreliability of coal. Renewables address both. Solar, wind and other renewable energy resources are available right now to tackle the worst of climate change. Crucially, they make our energy system more reliable and resilient than a system dominated by ageing coal-fired power stations. The importance of transforming to a renewable electricity system underpins the annual climate change statement, which is the third I've delivered to Parliament. The annual statement provides progress on our climate change and energy initiatives in 2024 and is an account of our commitment to transparency regarding our climate actions. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're doing well, but there's more to be done for emissions, for affordability and for reliability. I can say this because a key part of the annual climate change statement is consideration of the independent advice from the Climate Change Authority. Its annual progress report, which focuses 8 of its 10 recommendations on renewable energy, is made public today, along with our response to it. We've also published the latest emissions projections and quarterly results from the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory. The annual statement this year reflects how far we've come over the last 2.5 years to get Australia back on track after a decade of denial and delay. We've reduced sovereign risk and rebuilt confidence in Australia as an investment destination. This translates to better economic activity and more long-term jobs around our country. We've now put in place the systems and processes to set us up for a more prosperous future, to make the most of our country having the best renewable resources in the world that everyone wants next: sun, wind and critical minerals, to benefit from being a significant player in delivering the global shift to net zero, and to do so simultaneously while bringing emissions down. We've built a lot of momentum, but there's so much more to do. The key is to build on this momentum and then build on it again, because there's no achievable alternative that doesn't see otherwise avoidable harm done to our environment, our planet and future generations. Net zero by 2050 is not optional, which means the critical decade is now, not some hypothetical time in the distant future. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to note that the Climate Change Authority recognises the significant progress we've made so far. Its view now is that Australia has the policies in place to meet its 2030 targets. We're bringing emissions down in the electricity and land sectors, and that means emissions have fallen to 28.2% below 2005 levels already. Annual emissions are still lower now than they were at any point during the economy-wide COVID shutdowns, when heavy industry and transport was in hiatus. Carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel and industry, when measured on a per capita basis, are the lowest they've been in Australia since the late 1980s. But they need to fall faster into the future. The authority has emphasised that it will be important to hold course and to deliver the outcomes envisaged by the policies now in place, and we agree. The annual emissions projections confirm our policies are working and Australia is on track to deliver our legislated targets. Climate inactivists and net zero opponents will always find ways to say black is white by cherry-picking data points. But the baseline projections now show emissions in Australia falling 42.6% below 2005 levels over the next 6 years. This is a substantially greater reduction than projected for Australia even a few years ago. In 2021, emissions were expected to fall just 30% below 2005 levels in 2030. And we're almost at that point now in 2024. This jump reflects the strong design and implementation of significant policies the Albanese government has introduced over the last 30 months. And we are now outperforming previous projections for Australia's legislated 10-year total emissions budget. Last year, we were expected to come 1%. In 1% above budget by 2030. This year, we expect to be 3% below budget, meaning Australia will have emitted around 150 million tonnes less than budgeted for this decade, cutting the equivalent of an entire year of electricity emissions from our projections. Better still, none of these projections account for other policies that are still yet to be fully developed and implemented by the states and territories and indeed by the Commonwealth. Transitions of the scale that Australia is undertaking, and the world is as well, are not easy and don't happen overnight. But the pace is picking up. Over the past year, an increase in private and public investment has helped position Australia to build a stronger, more diversified and more resilient economy. More private capital went into developing new, clean, cheap and reliable energy projects in the last quarter alone than was invested in all of 2023. To facilitate this demand, along with commencing national tenders for the Capacity Investment Scheme this year, I've also declared 3 additional areas suitable for offshore wind energy in Australia, in Victoria, New South Wales and Western Australia. Whether it's the energy assets that are being developed offshore or onshore, we want this transition to be done right in the best interest of all. So we've put in more than $182 million towards strengthening approval processes, improving community engagement and oversight through the Office of the Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner, bolstering processes and practices to deliver a legacy of social and economic benefits to the regions hosting our renewable transformation, including through a new developer rating scheme. All of this is important to get it right so we can shift our energy system from the old approach of relying on fossil fuels to the new modern approach of generating power from clean, cheap, reliable renewables. In Australia, electricity accounts for nearly 35% of all emissions. It's the most polluting sector and decarbonising it is vital. Renewable energy is also vital to unlocking emissions reductions in other sectors because electrification is usually the lowest cost way to reduce emissions. 97% of our trading partners are also focused on reaching net zero, and they can use our help to get there. So we're already seeing that a renewable electricity system is the entry ticket for Australia, for Australian industry and Australian manufacturers to become the strongest players possible and in future trading partnerships. The Australian Energy Market Operator has also been consistently clear that the government's solution for a rapid increase in investment to deliver new, reliable, renewable generation capacity plus storage and firming and transmission lines will meet Australia's growing electricity needs as our current coal fleet retires. Between now and 2035, the market operator expects 90% of Australia's ageing, increasingly unreliable coal-fired power generators to retire. Just this week, we've seen AEMO having to juggle the grid to prepare for forecast higher demand, while more than 2.5 gigawatts of ageing coal-fired power units were offline, broken down or taken out for maintenance. The notion that Australia's ageing coal fleet should, or in fact even could, be relied upon to an even greater extent to power our system is nothing short of magical thinking. Already consumers are feeling the impacts of running old coal generators for longer. There has not been a single day in the last 18 months without some coal-fired generation experiencing unplanned outages, not a single day. And as the Australian energy regulator Claire Savage has said, and she sets the benchmark prices for consumers, and I quote, "Increasing coal plant outages are causing havoc for supply and driving up prices." On the day she testified, 26% of the eastern seaboard's coal fleet was offline. with about half down for planned maintenance and half due to failures. She went on to say that's having an impact on forward prices of electricity. And she said, and the reason I care about that is that I care about customers. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, so do we. Energy prices are a serious issue for households and for businesses. And the system isn't as fair as it should be. We want to fix that. We know that renewables are driving wholesale price of electricity down. It's why we welcome the focus of the recommendations made by the authority this year that are on optimising the rollout of the cheapest form of energy, renewables, and improving energy performance. We've agreed in principle, or noted all of the authority's recommendations. And it's particularly pleasing today to see data from the Australian Energy Market Commission that confirms more renewables in our grid will continue pushing energy bills down over the next 10 years. It also confirms that any delay to renewables would in fact increase costs. The good news is that we're making significant progress to bring more cheap energy into the system, and we've made sure each and every household is getting $300 in energy bill relief this financial year, and eligible small businesses are getting $325. Inflation data out this week shows a record fall in electricity prices, down more than 35% from October last year. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm also pleased to inform the House that 2024 has now set an official all-time record for renewables. Data released by the Clean Energy Regulator today shows that up to 7.5 gigawatts of renewable capacity will have been connected to the grid this year. That is a record. Just under half of that will come from rooftop solar, a sign that households and businesses are getting real value from the economic benefits that come when you harness free sunshine. Earlier this month I met Simone and Richard, who live in Winston Hills. It was the same day that their solar installers were out the front with vans and ladders putting up their new system. You see, Madam Deputy Speaker, Simone and Richard were the recipients of Australia's 4 millionth solar installation. They're also installing a battery and an EV charger, like so many other Australians. This world-beating uptake of renewable energy was only made possible by the Small-Scale Renewable Energy Scheme, and it means we now have got more rooftop solar capacity in our system than the entire fleet of coal-fired power stations across the country. That means that households and businesses are winning on two fronts, looking after our future generations by bringing down emissions and bringing down power bills today and, of course, for years to come. We currently have a pipeline of renewable energy projects that, when combined, will produce at least 45 gigawatts, around two-thirds of what's in the grid today. We've boosted wind and solar capacity in our power system by more than 40% of what it was when we came to office. And we're making sure that continues because there's more work to do. We're front-loading investment in the new renewable energy infrastructure through our capacity investment scheme. And we're reducing the roadblocks that make timely delivery of new projects challenging under the Renewable Energy Transformation Agreements that we've negotiated with New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, the ACT and Tasmania. Madam Deputy Speaker, I expected the capacity investment scheme to work well, but it's working better than I expected. This year we tendered for 6.6 gigawatts of new, clean, reliable, renewable generation and storage. We received bids for more than 9 times what we called for. 9 times more. That tells me that this pipeline from companies of investment who want to build good quality renewable projects is very strong indeed. And we want to keep it that way. The CIS tenders are due to finish in late 2027. That's why we've asked some of Australia's leading energy market experts to investigate reforms to the national electricity wholesale market in the years following. This reform will be about bringing even more cheap, clean, renewable energy into the system, about planning for a system for the 2030s that will be affordable, reliable and bring emissions down, about not putting all our eggs in the coal-fired basket when we've been told that those coal-fired generators, as they plan to retire their assets, are becoming more unreliable, and not about putting our eggs into the nuclear basket when experts say there is no way nuclear could generate a single watt of electricity before the 2040s at best. Last year, the authority recommended that we accelerate the rollout of network infrastructure to support the deployment of large-scale renewable projects, but working collaboratively with the state and territory counterparts as we do so. So we did. The $20 billion Rewiring the Nation program, which is the same scheme the Coalition wants to cancel, will make significant contributions toward this. We also agree that the CCA's recommendation this year to speed up connection approvals processes to get more clean, cheap, reliable renewables into the grid faster is a good one. That's why we've allocated more than $10 million to help this happen. I thank the Treasurer for his support in making that a reality. All these components are crucial to deliver the energy Australia needs by 2030 and beyond, while materially reducing emissions. Conversely, suggestions that Australia should turn its back on advancements such as these and revert to a system dominated by fossil fuels while waiting for a form of energy never before deployed in Australia will be the nail in the coffin of Australia reaching net zero by 2050. As the Climate Change Authority has said, and I quote, "Waiting for new, better, cheaper technologies is tantamount to choosing to continue to emit." The notion that nuclear energy in Australia is a serious solution to decarbonise by 2050 is a dangerous furphy. It doesn't survive contact with reality. Pausing policies that are currently lowering emissions in favour of ramping up policies that would increase emissions will not deliver net zero. Nuclear power generation commencing in the 2040s, less than a decade before we are due to meet the target, is not a solution or an antidote to the increase in emissions from extending fossil fuels in the interim. If it were to be, it would need to be rolled out on such a scale as to replace all the other emitting technologies. That would mean hundreds of nuclear reactors built across the country to keep the lights on, connected by thousands of kilometres of new transmission lines. Instead, the current scheme proposed by those in opposition is for just 7 plants, with just one to supply all of Western Australia. This energy mix that includes nuclear as the net zero silver bullet is incompatible with Australia's net zero ambitions, incompatible with building a future made in Australia, and incompatible with the direction of travel we're seeing around the rest of the world. It would see a return to delay, denial and dysfunction that has already cost Australians so much. Instead, Madam Deputy Speaker, in 2024, we're making sure Australians will benefit now from the opportunities afforded by the emerging net zero industries. We've passed legislation to establish the Net Zero Economy Authority so regions, workers and communities are supported to manage the impacts and share in the benefits of this transition. And our $22.7 billion commitment to a Future Made in Australia package will help Australia unlock private investment at a scale in net zero industries including renewable hydrogen, local battery and solar panel manufacturing, green metals processing and low-carbon liquid fuels, and it just passed the House and will pass the Senate tonight. Yeah. This will support long-term, well-paid jobs to more than 2 million workers across the economy in everything from trades to engineering, educators and other professionals. And it legislates community benefit principles to guarantee the positive impact flows to communities hosting these new industries. Because this shift that's already well underway is as much about creating jobs in the regions as it is about tackling climate change or securing Australia's future in the uncertain world, it's so important to all of us. Governments around the world change from time to time. There will be heightened global tensions. There will be geopolitical repositioning. But we must stay the course through the complex uncertainty of economic and security challenges because we have a window of time to act decisively. We must continue to act in our national interest, charting an Australian path in this global journey. This much is clear from the scientists, it's clear from the energy and industry experts, and we listen to those experts. They tell us that this decade will be critical for our energy grid and critical for the climate. Madam Deputy Speaker, if we want to position Australia as a powerhouse in the new global net zero economy, this is the critical decade as well. The course of this decade will be shaped by the choice the Australian people make in the next 6 months. It's a clear choice because, as the Climate Change Authority's report shows and is evident from our response to it, we have made the foundational and impactful shifts in the last 2.5 years to put Australia on the right track. We're doing the work, and that work is delivering positive change. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're making progress towards a healthier, more secure, sustainable, cohesive and prosperous Australia. How resilient we are to climate change and the impacts of climate change, how much we can reduce our emissions and how comprehensive we can make Australia's circular economy will continue to be measured as part of keeping Australia on track to decarbonise by 2050. In 2023, we commissioned the Climate Change Authority to undertake a separate, independent technical assessment of how this country's key sectors can move towards decarbonisation. That's informed our work on this and is underpinning our national roadmap to reach net zero, which is progressing well. Our revised carbon crediting scheme and reformed safeguard mechanism are both central to this. Supported by $621 million in funds allocated this year to keep our industry thriving as it transforms its processes. Our projections, as well as the authority's progress report, show that the safeguard mechanism is also performing even better than we expected. By 2040, more than 500 million tonnes of emissions will be cut on-site across our largest facilities. When combined with offsets for the hardest-to-abate sectors, this reaches 900 million tonnes by 2040. 200 million tonnes of abatement will happen this decade, equivalent to taking 2/3 of the cars off Australia's roads. We're also working directly to reduce transport emissions, and in March the Albanese government did what others have tried and failed to do. For 20 years, we legislated Australia's first new vehicle efficiency standards. These will reduce emissions from new cars by 60% and from light commercial vehicles by 50% over the next 6 years. It also incentivises the market to offer drivers more choice of electric and plug-in hybrids, as well as better fuel-efficient models across the board. Wherever I travel across our country, I hear people talking about their plans to buy a new EV or hybrid as their next car. It's so important they have better choices. Communities and households have a big role to play in reaching net zero, and they're taking action in record numbers. Which is why it's particularly good news for households with solar and EVs that Standards Australia has now enabled vehicle-to-grid charging, or reverse charging in Australia for the first time. This effectively transforms a car into a household battery on wheels. It's just one way we're helping energy consumers and turning them into energy prosumers, saving money on their bills, reducing pressure on our grids and helping bring emissions down. We've distributed nearly $300 million across the states to make social housing more energy efficient, including through adding more solar panels and apartment buildings, and we've done more even today. We've also implemented $100 million in community energy upgrades to help councils cut emissions and reduce bills through energy efficiency and new solar for community buildings, everything from local halls to sports facilities. And we've allocated nearly $56 million to help more than 2,400 small and medium-sized businesses do the same as well. It's why we agree in principle to the authority's recommendation to make full use of our distribution networks, the local poles and wires and commercial and industrial facilities to host more renewable electricity generation and storage going forward, and at the consumer level as well. We're already doing that, supporting the increased storage in the distribution network through Community Batteries for Household Solar program. In the last year, we've been to suburbs from Narara on the central coast of New South Wales to McGill in South Australia to begin opening some of the more than 400 new community batteries this program has been delivering. And I look forward to opening more in coming months. And to coordinate this, we've set out Australia's first consumer energy roadmap. This is the next big reform, Madam Deputy Speaker, making sure that those consumers who have the energy resources at their disposal are able to be in control of those resources, to get maximum benefit out of it for themselves and also for the grid. But we're also focused on those Australians who don't have access to their own resources. This is about them as much as it is about the households with rooftop solar, because no one should miss out on the benefits of the energy revolution, and we make sure they don't. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to admit I believe there's cause for quiet optimism. We hear a lot from some in the media about how hard this transformation is. So hard, in fact, they say we should give up. They don't back a future made in Australia. They, and I must say including some in this parliament, advocate for failure, because failure keeps Australia stuck in the past. It's increasingly obvious that the hope for failure is a ruse to protect the status quo. We want more for Australia, and we're putting everything in place to make it happen. That's not to say there aren't challenges. I'm acutely aware of them. But the numbers show our plan is working. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are always those who call on the government to do more, and there are those who call on us to do much, much less. To stop the direction of travel we're now on, to reverse the positive impacts we've had in the last 2.5 years, to cut Australia's growth opportunities off at the knees. They want to shut us off from the rest of the world, to jeopardise the future prosperity of our businesses and our industry. We're a trading nation. Our wealth and success has been determined by what we've been able to sell, and we've had a lot of buyers. We don't want to change. In fact, we don't want to stop that change. We want to see more of it. Getting this right, and we're on the right track already, ensures the flow-on effect for households and workers in the coming years will be significant, because we're starting to see a shift in what our trading partners want to buy. We're seeing opportunities that we need to capitalise on, as countries around the world race to capitalise on those very same opportunities. As the Climate Change Authority recognises, it is a global contest to dominate green technologies, to access green resources, including critical minerals. This is a race we intend to win, because we are seeing the benefit of building capabilities at home in new industries, not just because it's good for the climate, but because it's in our national interest, good for our security, good for our economic and international interests, and most of all, good for all Australians. Yeah.